peer pressure is one of those big, big topics. Now, you can't just sit down and say to your kids, tonight, we're going to talk about peer pressure, because you know what your teenage children are going to do. They're going to turn around and go, no, we're not. No, thank you. And off they go back onto their screens or their tablets or whatever things the cool kids do these days, TikToking, Instagramming, who knows? We sort of smile and nod and pretend we know what they're doing, but it's a different world, isn't it? So they're off doing those things, but we do want to make sure those messages are heard. And I think one of the best ways of doing that is introducing these topics in very supportive, helpful, encouraging ways. And that means don't just sit down and say, we're going to talk about peer pressure, because it's not going to work. You could drop it into conversation. A bit like, oh, what do you think you do in that situation? You might have Coronation Street in the background. Who watches Coronation Street these days? That's probably a bad example. You might have something on in the background that they might be watching, some even that they're watching on Netflix. Ask them, what would you do in that circumstance? What would you do in this situation? And that's just a good way of introducing a few ideas. It's also a good way of introducing emotional literacy as well. This idea of helping children to understand emotions and how somebody else is feeling. So that idea of empathy. Do you understand what somebody else's experience might be in those circumstances? Now, it's very difficult to do that. And we know that there are lots of children who really struggle with that idea of understanding somebody else's perspective. It's something that can take quite a while in development. The theoretical background of it, we can, in theory, start to understand that from a very young age, about 4, 5, 6 years old. But to be able to apply it and actually fully understand somebody else's experience is actually a lot more difficult. And being able to talk with your children about how do you think they would feel in those circumstances is a really good way of introducing this idea. So actually sitting and watching people, sit in a coffee shop, sit at home, sit doing something where you might be able to just say, what do you think? What would you do in those circumstances? Gosh, goodness me, what do you think that person would have felt? And you're very gradually introducing this idea of getting somebody to understand somebody else's perspective. And I think that's a very helpful way of introducing these ideas.